Hello everyone. In this video we're going to continue to investigate the anatomy of the eye. We will recap the structure of the tunics of the eye and then expand on that with some of the internal anatomy or some further internal anatomy of the eye. So just to recap what we had looked at before, there are three layers that make up the wall of the eye. The outermost is the fibrous tunic, right, composed of the sclera and composed of the cornea, which is the transparent anterior bulge. Internal to the fibrous tunic is a layer known as the vascular tunic, which includes the choroid, very thin here on the diagram between the white and the yellow. Anteriorly, the choroid expands into the ciliary body. Now you can see the ciliary body cut open here and cut open here, but you can also see it kind of coming down like this, right? And so all of this area that I'm highlighting here, oops, no, not sure, all of that area, that is all ciliary body. The ciliary body has two parts: the ciliary muscle, which pulls on the suspensory ligaments, and the ciliary process, which produces a fluid known as aqueous humor. Extending off the anterior portion of the ciliary body, you have the iris. The iris can be seen here, cut, and there, cut, and you can see a little bit of it circling around that way, right? At the center of the iris is an opening that light passes through, known as the pupil. Now let's take a look at the lens. The lens is a transparent structure that's somewhat elastic in its consistency. It is suspended inside the eye by the suspensory ligaments, which encircle it like spokes of a bicycle wheel. And the elasticity of the lens makes it want to be more spherical than you see there, right? But because the suspensory ligaments are pulling on it, it causes the lens to kind of flatten out a bit. When the muscles of the ciliary body, in other words, the ciliary muscles, when they contract, that releases the tension on the lens, and the lens is allowed to resume its more spherical shape. Now, it might be counterintuitive how how a contracting muscle relieves tension. In order to understand how that happens, know that the ciliary muscle is a circularly arranged muscle. And remember that when a circular arranged muscle contracts, it moves inwards. And so as the ciliary muscle contracts, it moves closer to the lens, which alleviates the pressure on the suspensory ligaments. This is part of focusing, which is known as accommodation. So when you need to focus on different objects, depending on how far the object is away from you, the ciliary muscles of the ciliary body will contract or relax to varying extents so you can shape the lens properly. By default, when the muscles are relaxed, the lens is in a position where it naturally will have objects further than 20 feet away in focus on your retina. And then the last object, or the last layer, is the retina itself, shown in yellow, where it's cut open. But then also all of this is you're looking at the surface of the retina as well. Now, the suspensory ligaments and the lens divide the eye into basically two spaces. Up here, the space is the anterior cavity. And the anterior cavity includes this space between the lens and the iris, and then here the space between the iris and the cornea. This space is filled with aqueous humor that's produced by the ciliary process of the ciliary body. It's derived from blood, so it has oxygen and nutrients from blood. And one of the functions of this fluid is that it circulates up through the pupil into the space between the iris and the cornea, and then it is reabsorbed through something known as the canal of Schlemm. And by doing so, what it's doing is it's carrying oxygen and nutrients to the tissues within this space, as well as carrying away waste. This is another situation where we have a material being produced as well as that same material being reabsorbed, and we need to make sure that the amount produced is in balance with the amount that's being reabsorbed into blood. Otherwise, you can either have fluid accumulating or a fluid diminishment. Now, it's not uncommon for the canal of Schlemm, also known as the scleral venous sinus, to become obstructed in some way, and so that the exiting of the aqueous humor, okay, and the aqueous humor fills the anterior cavity. Right. It's not uncommon for the canal of Schlemm to become obstructed, and so the aqueous humor does not drain as quickly as it's made, and that causes a buildup of pressure in this space, and that condition is known as glaucoma. The buildup of pressure here is dangerous because a buildup of pressure in the anterior cavity of the eye is going to exert pressure on this space back here. The space back here be posterior to the lens and bounded by the lens and the suspensory ligaments and the retina. This space is known as the posterior cavity, right? Sometimes known as the vitreous humor, right? All right, so it's also known as the posterior cavity. It is filled with a thick gelatin known as vitreous humor. And the vitreous humor on this image is depicted by this large kind of pale white material, but it fills the entire space. The job of the vitreous humor is to provide some internal pressure that keeps the eyeball from collapsing. So remember, all of this, the walls or the material of the tunics is soft and fibrous. If it doesn't have if it doesn't have material on the inside holding it open, the eyeball will collapse. The vitreous humor also produces pressure that keeps the retina pushed up in place against the choroid. There's not a firm connection between the retina and the choroid. They can separate, which is what happens in a separated retina. Right? Now, the danger with glaucoma is that the buildup of pressure in the anterior cavity will exert pressure into the posterior cavity, and increased pressure in the posterior cavity will begin to push on these blood vessels. And if the pressure within this cavity is great enough where it begins to compress the blood vessels to the point where blood delivery is diminished or severely reduced, then that means the living cells of the retina, the light receptors, right, will not be getting the oxygen and nutrients they need, and they can begin to die and degrade, causing progressive vision loss. Right? Let's walk through this on an image of the model. Right? So here is one of the eye models. It's been cut open in sagittal section. Right? The cornea, the part of the model that depicts the cornea has been removed in this particular example. And so in white, there and there, we can see the sclera. Right? Oops. Go back. The way the model is constructed is you don't really get to see the choroid from this image, but this tan material right there, that tan material is the inner surface of the retina. Okay. The area right here, this is the optic nerve, and so the area where the optic nerve plugs into the retina, that is the optic disc. Okay. And you can just make out, or it's hard to see, but I'm going to point to it. Right there, that is where the fovea is on the model. If we look anteriorly, this dark area here, right, that is the ciliary body, okay? And this right here, this extension off of it, that is the iris. And this space at the center is the pupil. You can also get a glimpse of the extrinsic eye muscles on this particular image as well. They are kind of in a brownish red attached to the outer surface of the sclera. You can see an extrinsic muscle there and there. Okay. If we look at the models from a bit of an angle, we can see some additional structures as well as some familiar ones. There's the cornea. Right? There's the optic nerve, optic disc. Right? What we can see that's new in this image is we can see the cornea, which is represented on the model by a clear piece of plastic. We can see this right there, which is the ciliary body. I'm just going to degrade to abbreviations. We can see the back of the iris. And this divot right there represents one half of the opening, that is the pupil. Again, we can see extrinsic eye muscles attached to the sclera. If we look at the model from another perspective, we get a better view of the optic disc, as well as the macula with the fovea centralis at its center. You can think of this, if I zoom, oh, no, I was trying to zoom, but let's not try that again. You can see that there's a little bit of a pink circle. That's the macula. And you can think of the green dot at the center as being where the fovea would be. When you look from the front, you can see the colored portion of the iris. Okay. I think that's going to be it, I think. We'll have one more short video just walking through the pathway of light through the eye.